The frozen junkyard lay silent under a pale blue sky. The sun here gave no warmth. It only cast a dull glow over the mountains of scrap. Tall heaps of broken metal stood like frozen giants, their sharp edges covered in frost. Old ship hulls, shattered engines, and empty cargo crates stretched for miles in every direction. In the middle of this lifeless place sat Rin. She was small and thin, her clothes torn from weeks of wear. Her breath came out in white clouds, each one fading into the cold air. She had been here for 3 days, ever since her scavenger crew had left her behind. They had been in a hurry when the patrol ships arrived, and Rin had not been quick enough to reach the transport. The last thing she had seen was the hatch closing and the ship lifting into the gray clouds, leaving her standing in the snow-covered scrap. Her stomach ached from hunger. She had eaten the last of her food yesterday. She tried to move, but her legs felt heavy. The wind bit at her cheeks and hands. There was no shelter nearby, only the shadow of a broken cargo hauler that leaned to one side. The metal walls blocked some of the wind, but the cold still crept in through every gap. Rin pulled her knees to her chest and wrapped her arms around them. She tried to think of warm places. She thought of her home world, with its soft green skies and long summer days. She remembered the smell of the markets and the sound of voices in the crowded streets. But those memories only made the present feel colder. Far away, she heard a sound. It was faint at first, just a crunching of snow and the clank of boots against metal. She froze, unsure if it was a scavenger, a patrol drone, or something worse. Slowly, she leaned forward to peek out from behind the cargo hauler. A figure moved between the piles of scrap. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wrapped in a thick coat with a hood pulled low over his head. A heavy pack was strapped to his back, and he carried a metal rod in one hand. His boots left deep marks in the snow. The sound of his steps grew louder as he approached. Rin's heart beat faster. She had met humans before in the border stations, but they were traders who spoke little and kept to themselves. This one moved with purpose, scanning the piles as if searching for something. She wondered if he would even notice her. The man stopped near a stack of crushed transport panels. He leaned down and brushed away the snow from a small piece of machinery. He studied it for a moment, then placed it into a side pouch. When he looked up, his eyes caught hers. For a long second, they just stared at each other. Rin thought of running, but her body was too weak. The man tilted his head slightly, as if trying to understand what he was seeing. Then he began to walk toward her. His steps were slow and careful, not the rushed pace of someone ready to harm. He stopped a few paces away. "You're freezing," he said, his voice calm but firm. Rin did not answer. She did not know if speaking would make her seem weak. The man set his pack down in the snow, unbuckled it, and pulled out a thick wool blanket. He stepped closer and held it out to her. She hesitated, glancing from the blanket to his face. His expression was steady, without the sharpness she had seen in other scavengers' eyes. She reached out slowly, and he draped the blanket around her shoulders. The warmth hit her at once. It felt strange after so many hours of biting cold. "Better?" he asked. Rin nodded once. She wanted to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. The man opened a small metal tin from his pack and pulled out a ration bar. He broke it in half and handed her a piece. "Eat," he said. "It's not much, but it will help." Her fingers shook as she took it. She bit into the hard surface and felt the dry crumbs stick to her mouth. But it was food, and she did not care about the taste. She finished it quickly, trying not to look too desperate. The man sat down on a piece of metal beside her. "Name's Tomas," he said, glancing up at the sky. "I'm here for salvage. Didn't expect to find someone still breathing in this place." Rin looked at him for a moment. Her voice was quiet when she finally spoke. "Rin." Tomas nodded. "Rin. All right. Well, it's too cold to stay out here much longer. Patrol drones sweep through at night, and you don't want to be out when that happens." She shifted uncomfortably. I don't have anywhere to go. Then we'll figure something out, he said simply. For a moment, they sat in silence, listening to the wind whistle between the heaps of scrap. The blanket was heavy on her shoulders, holding in the heat. It was the first time in days she had felt anything close to safe. Tomas looked around the yard again. There's a place a little deeper in, he said. An old cargo bay that still has half a roof. It'll block most of the wind. We can rest there for a while before moving on. Rin hesitated. Trust was a rare thing out here. But she was too cold and too tired to survive the night alone. She gave a small nod. Thomas stood, lifting his pack again. He offered his hand, and after a moment, Rin took it. His grip was firm and warm. They began to walk, the snow crunching beneath their boots. As they moved between the towering piles of wreckage, Rin glanced up at the sky. The pale blue sun was already sinking lower, and the shadows stretched long across the junkyard. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself and stayed close to the human. For the first time since she had been left behind, she felt that maybe she would see another morning. The walk to the cargo bay was slow. Rin's legs still felt weak, and every step sent a dull ache through her feet. The snow-covered ground was uneven, littered with jagged pieces of metal half buried under ice. Tomas moved ahead, picking a careful path between the piles of wreckage. He checked behind him every few steps to make sure she was still following. The air was sharp in her lungs, but the blanket Thomas had given her trapped enough warmth to keep her moving. She pulled it tightly around her shoulders and lowered her head to block the wind. Every now and then, the wind carried the distant groan of shifting metal as the frozen junkyard settled. After some time, Tomas slowed down and pointed ahead. Between two tall stacks of crushed starship panels was a shadowed opening. Inside was an old cargo bay half buried in the snow. The roof had caved in on one side, but the other half still stood, giving shelter from the worst of the wind. This will do for now, Tomas said. He stepped inside first, testing the ground to make sure it was stable. The floor was covered in a thin layer of frost, but it was flat enough to sit on without slipping. Rin followed him in, feeling the wind ease. As they stepped out of the open yard, the shadows inside made it a little darker, but she felt safer here. Thomas set his pack down and crouched beside it. He pulled out a small heating lamp, about the size of a canister, and placed it between them. With a click, it came to life, glowing faintly and giving off a soft wave of warmth. The air around them began to thaw ever so slightly. Better than sitting out there, Tomas said with a small smile. Rin sat down cross-legged, still wrapped in the blanket. The faint warmth from the lamp felt like a gift. Her fingers, stiff from the cold, slowly began to loosen. Thomas reached into his pack again and took out another ration bar. You'll need more food, he said, handing it to her. The cold burns a lot of energy. She accepted it, this time eating more slowly. The dry taste was still there, but her body welcomed the food. She wondered how many ration bars he had left. Sharing them with her might mean he would go hungry later. Why did you help me? She asked quietly. Tomas shrugged. Because you needed it. Rin frowned slightly. Most people here would walk past. I'm not most people, he said. His tone was simple, without pride or boasting. For a while, they sat in silence, the only sound being the faint hum of the heating lamp. Outside, the wind howled against the broken walls of the cargo bay. Rin could hear the clinking of loose metal somewhere high up in the stacks. Where were you going when you were left behind? Tomas asked. Rin looked down. Nowhere, she said. My crew moved from yard to yard looking for scrap. When the patrol ships came, they ran. I wasn't fast enough. Tomas nodded slowly, not asking more. Patrols don't bother me much, he said. I keep my head down, work quick, and leave before they sweep the area. They're not looking for one person with a bag of parts. You're a scavenger? She asked. Sort of. I fix things. Sell what still works. Some of this junk is more than junk. You'd be surprised how many ships break down for want of a piece someone threw away. Rin thought about this. She had never been good with machines. Her crew had kept her around because she was small enough to crawl through tight places in the wrecks. It wasn't the safest work, but it had been better than being alone until now. The wind outside shifted, carrying a faint mechanical hum. Thomas lifted his head and listened. Drones, he said softly. They're still far off, but they'll be closer soon. Rin felt her chest tighten. Will they come here? Maybe, but we'll be fine if we stay quiet. Thomas adjusted the heating lamp so the light was less visible from outside. The shadows deepened, and the glow became a soft circle between them. They waited in silence. The hum grew louder, then faded again as the drones passed somewhere beyond the walls of the bay. Rin's grip on the blanket loosened. She let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Thomas leaned back against the wall. See? Nothing to worry about, he said, though his eyes still scanned the shadows near the entrance. Rin studied him for a moment. His coat was worn at the edges, his gloves patched in more than one place, yet his gear was well cared for. He moved, like someone who had been in dangerous places before and had learned how to leave them safely. You could have kept walking when you saw me, she said. I could have, Thomas replied, but I've been cold and alone before. I know how it feels. Something in his tone told her there was more to that story, but she didn't ask. She wasn't ready to share all of her own story yet either. The lamp's glow flickered as the small fuel cell inside began to run low. Thomas checked it, then turned it down to make it last longer. We'll rest here until night passes, he said. Moving in the dark is too risky. Rin nodded. Her eyes were heavy, but she didn't want to fall asleep. The cold had a way of luring people into sleep they didn't wake from. Still, the blanket and the heat from the lamp made it hard to stay alert. Get some rest, Thomas said. I'll keep watch. She hesitated, then lay down on the floor with the blanket, wrapped tightly around her. The faint warmth, the sound of the wind outside, and the steady presence of the human made her eyelids grow heavier. Before she drifted off, she heard Thomas shifting his weight, his boots scraping lightly against the frost. When she woke, the light outside the bay had changed to the pale silver of a frozen dawn. Thomas was still sitting near the lamp, his back straight, watching the entrance. Morning, he said quietly. We'll move when you're ready. For the first time since she had been left in the junkyard, Rin felt like she had a reason to get up and keep going. The pale silver light of dawn spread across the frozen junkyard. The piles of scrap looked sharper in the morning glow, their edges glistening with frost. Rin sat up slowly, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. The blanket was still, around her shoulders, its warmth now mixed with the faint smell of metal from the bay. Thomas was already on his feet. He was checking the straps on his pack, making sure everything was in place. When he saw Rin awake, he gave a small nod. We should move before the patrol drones start their first sweep, he said. Rin pulled the blanket tighter and stood. Her legs were still stiff, but the food and rest had given her a little more strength. She followed Thomas out of the cargo bay and back into the open yard. The wind was calmer than yesterday, but the cold still clung to everything. They walked between tall stacks of broken ship parts. Sometimes Thomas stopped to study a piece of metal or a shattered engine, deciding if it was worth taking. Most of the time he kept moving, scanning the path ahead. Rin kept her eyes on the ground to avoid tripping over hidden scraps. Every now and then, she looked up at the endless piles around them. The junkyard felt like a maze, each turn leading to another stretch of wreckage. After a while, Rin spoke quietly. Why do you work in a place like this? Thomas glanced at her, then back at the path. Because there's value here if you know where to look, he said. Some people see only trash. I see parts that can be repaired, tools that can be used, and metal that can be sold. It's dangerous, but it's work I can do alone. You work alone all the time? She asked. Mostly, Tomas said. Less trouble that way. But sometimes when you find someone worth helping, you don't walk past. Rin didn't reply at first. The words stayed in her mind. She wasn't used to people thinking she was worth helping. Her crew had never said anything like that. They walked for another hour before Thomas stopped in front of a narrow gap between two towers of scrap. Shortcut, he said. He squeezed through, with Rin following close behind. On the other side was an open space where the ground was clearer. In the center lay the wreck of a small shuttle, its hull dented but mostly intact. Thomas walked toward it. This is where I found the heating lamp, he explained. Still a few good parts inside. While he worked on loosening a panel from the shuttle, Rin wandered a short distance away. She noticed a small piece of glass sticking out from the snow. When she brushed the frost away, it revealed a cracked visor from a space helmet. She held it in her hands for a moment, imagining the person who had worn it. Tomas noticed her looking at it. That probably belonged to someone who didn't make it out, he said gently. This yard has plenty of stories like that. Rin set the visor down carefully. Were you ever left behind? She asked. Thomas's hands paused on the panel he was working on. For a moment he didn't answer. Then he said, Yes, a long time ago. I was with a repair crew. We were working on a station near the border. Pirates came. My crew ran. I wasn't near the escape ship. What happened? Rin asked softly. I hid until they left, Thomas said. Then I fixed what I could on a broken shuttle and got out. It wasn't easy. But that's when I learned that surviving is about finding a way forward, no matter what's behind you. Rin was quiet. She felt a strange connection to his story. She understood the cold feeling of being left with nothing but yourself. Thomas pulled the panel free and added it to his pack. Come on, he said. We need to reach a safer spot before nightfall. There's an old watchtower on the edge of the yard. It's high enough to see patrols coming. As they walked again, Rin found herself speaking without thinking. When my crew left me, I thought it meant I wasn't useful. I thought maybe I wasn't worth taking along. Thomas looked at her, his expression firm. It doesn't matter what they thought. They made their choice. You make yours now. You choose to keep going. That's what matters. His words stayed with her as they moved through the junkyard. By midday, they reached the base of the old watchtower. It was built from stacked cargo crates and reinforced with welded beams. The ladder was rusty but still held firm when Thomas tested it. He climbed first, then helped Rin up when she reached the harder sections. At the top, they had a wide view of the yard. The piles of scrap stretched far in every direction, shining in the pale light. In the distance, the faint shapes of patrol. Drones moved between the stacks, their scanning lights sweeping the ground. This will be our camp tonight, Thomas said. The height will keep us safe from most scavengers, and we'll see trouble coming early. Rin sat down near the edge, still wrapped in the blanket. The cold air bit at her cheeks, but the view made her forget it for a moment. It's strange, she said. From up here, it almost looks peaceful. Thomas gave a small smile. Peace is rare out here. Best to enjoy it when you can. They set up the heating lamp again and shared another small meal. Rin felt the silence between them change. It was no longer the silence of strangers. It was quieter but warmer somehow, like they were both learning to trust each other in their own way. As night began to fall, the pale sun dipped below the edge of the yard, and the first stars appeared above. Rin pulled the blanket closer and glanced at Thomas. He was sitting with his back to the ladder, watching the sky with a calm she didn't quite understand. For the first time since meeting him, she thought maybe he wasn't just helping her out of pity. Maybe he actually wanted her to make it out of this place. That thought, small but steady, was enough to keep her warm through the night. The night air was colder than Rin expected. Even at the top of the watchtower, where the wind should have been sharper, the thick blanket Tomas had given her kept most of the chill away. The heating lamp between them glowed softly, casting a circle of light on the metal floor. Outside that circle, the junkyard stretched into darkness. Above them, the sky was clear. Thousands of stars shone like small crystals scattered across the black. Some twinkled faintly, while others burned with steady light. A thin, pale moon hung low near the horizon, its surface marked by deep shadows. Rin sat with her knees pulled up, staring at the stars. She had not seen such a clear sky in a long time. In her crew, nights were usually spent deep in the yard, searching for salvage until exhaustion made them sleep. There had never been time to look up. Thomas was sitting, across from her, leaning back on his hands, his eyes also on the sky. "Cold night," he said softly. "It is," Rin agreed. Her voice was calm, almost distant. "But it feels different up here." "How so?" he asked. She thought for a moment before answering. "It doesn't feel like the yard anymore. From here, it's quiet. Almost like we're somewhere else." Tomas nodded slowly. "Sometimes the view changes how you feel about a place. Down there, it's all danger and rust. Up here, you can forget for a while." For a few minutes, they sat in silence, the only sounds being the faint hum of the lamp and the soft creak of the tower shifting in the wind. Then Thomas spoke again. "What's your home like?" Rin hesitated. She had not talked about her home in a long time. "It's warm," she said finally. "The skies are green in the evenings, and the rivers are wide. My family used to live near the coast. The air always smelled like salt and flowers." Thomas listened quietly. "Sounds peaceful." "It was," Rin said, her voice low. "But there was never much work. That's why I left. I thought traveling with a crew would be better. I thought I'd see more of the galaxy." "Did you?" Tomas asked. She shook her head. "I saw a lot of junkyards, a lot of broken ships, not much else." Tomas gave a faint smile. "The galaxy can be like that. Not everything out there is worth seeing." "What about you?" Rin asked, turning the question back to him. Thomas looked up at the stars again before answering. "I grew up on Earth. My family lived near the ocean, too. Big waves, endless horizon. I worked in shipyards as a kid, fixing hulls and engines. It wasn't glamorous, but I liked building something that could fly." "You left Earth?" Rin asked. He nodded. "I wanted to see more. Signed up for work on stations, then freighters. Moved from job to job until I ended up out here. Been traveling ever since." Rin studied his face in the soft light. There was a calmness in his voice, but also something unspoken, as if he had lost things along the way. She didn't press him for more. The wind shifted, carrying a faint metallic whistle from the piles below. Rin pulled the blanket tighter and moved a little closer to the lamp. Tomas noticed and adjusted the lamp's settings, making the glow warmer. "Do you miss it?" she asked suddenly. "Miss what?" "Your home. The ocean." Tomas looked out at the stars, his eyes reflecting the faint light. "Every day," he said, "but missing it doesn't change where I am now. All I can do is keep moving forward." Rin thought about his words. She had spent so much time thinking about what she had lost that she had not thought much about moving forward. The idea felt strange, but also possible. Below them, a patrol drone's light beams swept across the ground, far away but still visible. Rin tensed, but Thomas didn't move. "Too far to worry about," he said quietly. "Up here we're safe." The beam passed and disappeared into the maze of metal. The night grew quiet again. Thomas reached into his pack and pulled out 2 small metal cups. He poured warm liquid from a flask into each and handed one to Rin. "It's just heated water," he said, "but it'll help keep you warm." Rin took a sip. The heat spread through her hands and into her chest. "Thank you," she said softly. "You're welcome," Thomas replied. They stayed like that for a long time, sipping the warm water, talking in low voices about things that didn't matter much. Old ships Thomas had repaired, strange pieces of junk Rin had seen in the yard. The stories were small, but they filled the cold night with something that wasn't loneliness. At one point, Rin noticed a streak of light flash across the sky. "What was that?" she asked. "Meteor," Thomas said, "burning up in the atmosphere. Just passing by." "It looked like it was falling toward us," Rin said. "It wasn't," Thomas replied with a small smile. "Things can look closer than they really are. The sky plays tricks." They kept watching the stars, each lost in their own thoughts. Rin found herself wondering what it would be like to travel to one of those lights, to stand under a different sky again. Eventually, Thomas stood and walked to the edge of the tower. He scanned the yard below, then came back to sit beside her. "Get some rest," he said. "We'll need to move early tomorrow." Rin nodded but stayed awake a little longer. The stars above seemed endless, and for the first time since being left behind, she didn't feel small under them. The blanket was warm, the lamp's glow steady, and Thomas's presence solid beside her. She lay down, the metal floor cold under the blanket, but bearable. Her eyes drifted closed, and she listened to the faint hum of the heating lamp and the quiet breathing of the human who had not walked past her. Somewhere far above, the stars kept burning. The night air was colder than before. The warmth from the heating lamp had faded, and the metal of the watchtower felt icy beneath Rin's hands. She stayed close to Thomas, who was quietly checking the straps on his pack. The soft hum of distant engines mixed with the howl of the wind through the junkyard. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed from the far side of the yard. Thomas's eyes sharpened. He stood slowly and moved to the edge of the tower, looking out into the darkness. The glow of distant lights flickered between the piles of scrap. "Drones," Thomas whispered. "They are coming closer." Rin's heart raced. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The cold was not the only danger now. Patrol drones were known to scan the junkyard at night. They did not stop for small scavengers. Being caught meant trouble, fines, arrest, or worse. Thomas gestured for Rin to follow him down the ladder. "We can't stay here," he said. "They will find us if we wait." Rin's legs trembled as she climbed down. The ladder was cold and slippery, but Thomas's steady hands helped her keep balance. Once on the ground, they moved quickly but quietly between the scrap piles. The rumble grew louder, and faint blue lights cut through the dark. Thomas led Rin through a narrow gap between 2 half-crushed starships. The metal walls closed in around them, making their footsteps sound louder than they wished. Rin kept her breath shallow, her eyes wide. The cold had made her slow before, but now adrenaline sharpened her senses. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound closer. Thomas stopped beside a fallen engine block and pressed his hand to the frozen metal. "Stay low," he whispered. "The drones use light beams to scan. If they catch your heat, they will know you are here." Rin crouched down, pulling the blanket over her head like a small shield. Thomas did the same. The blue scanning lights passed near them, sweeping slowly across the ground. Rin held her breath as a beam moved just inches from her face. The cold air stung her skin, but she stayed still. The light passed without finding them. When the drones moved on, Thomas motioned for her to follow again. They crawled through tight spaces, avoiding open areas. The frozen junkyard felt like a giant maze built to trap the careless. After what seemed like hours, They reached a small clearing where an old transport container lay half buried in snow. Thomas pulled a small tool from his pack and pried open the rusted door. Inside was a narrow space just big enough to hide 2 people. They slipped inside and closed the door quietly. The cold here was less sharp, blocked by thick metal walls. Rin let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "We should rest here for a while," Thomas said. "The drones will sweep this area soon, but they won't stop long." Rin nodded. Her body ached from the cold and the run. She wrapped the blanket tighter and leaned against the container's wall. Thomas pulled out another ration bar and broke it in half. "Eat," he said. "We need energy to move again." Rin took the food with shaky hands. The dry taste was hard to swallow, but hunger made it easier. They sat in silence, listening to the distant hum of drone engines and the soft wind outside. The cold metal walls muffled sounds but did not block them completely. After some time, Thomas looked at Rin. "You did well back there," he said. "Not many people could stay that calm." Rin managed a small smile. "I learned to hide," she said. "It was never easy, but I survived." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "Out here, survival is about more than hiding. It's about knowing when to move and when to wait." Rin looked at him. "How do you know where to go?" "Experience," Thomas said simply. "I've been in places worse than this junkyard. You learn to read the signs, the wind, the lights, the sounds." The small space felt warmer as Thomas spoke, not from heat but from the growing bond between them. Outside, the drone lights faded into the distance. The rumble of engines grew softer until it disappeared. Rin yawned and leaned back against the wall. The blanket felt heavy now, but it was comforting. Thomas watched her for a moment and then closed his eyes. "Try to get some rest," he said. "We'll need all our strength soon." Rin closed her eyes, but her mind raced. The frozen junkyard had been a place of fear and loneliness. Now, with Thomas nearby, it felt less like a trap and more like a challenge they could face together. After a few minutes, Thomas stirred. "We should move before the patrols return," he said quietly. "There's a safer place not far from here." Rin nodded and stood slowly. The cold air hit her face again, but she felt ready. Together, they slipped out of the container and into the darkness. The blanket wrapped around Rin was a shield against the cold and the fear. The stars above shone brightly, their light distant but steady. Thomas glanced up for a moment and then back at Rin. "We'll watch those stars again soon," he said with a small smile. "And next time, you won't be alone." Rin returned the smile, feeling hope for the first time since she was left in the frozen junkyard. The cold air stung Rin's cheeks as she stepped out from the small container. The sky above was still dark but starting to lighten with the first hint of dawn. The junkyard was quiet, but Rin knew that stillness was dangerous. Patrol drones would begin their round soon, and they had to move quickly. Thomas looked around, eyes sharp as ever. "We need to reach the old freighter before the patrols start scanning again," he said softly. "It's hidden in the eastern part of the yard. Not many come this way." Rin nodded, wrapping the blanket tighter around her. The warmth was fading fast, but the comfort of it remained. They moved carefully, stepping over frozen debris and ducking under low-hanging metal scraps. The junkyard looked endless, but Thomas seemed to know the way well. His footsteps were sure and steady, while Rin's were cautious but growing stronger. After some time, they reached a spot where the wreckage opened into a small clearing. In the middle stood the skeleton of a large freighter. Its hull was battered and rusted, but the outline was clear against the snowy ground. Thomas approached the freighter's side and pressed a hand against the cold metal. "This is home for now," he said quietly. Rin looked at the broken ship with new eyes. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. Something she hadn't had in days. Thomas found a hatch that still worked and pulled it open. The inside was dark but dry. He turned on a small flashlight and waved her inside. Rin stepped in slowly. The warmth from her blanket faded as the cold inside the freighter touched her skin. Tomas moved quickly to start a small heating unit, and soon the air inside began to warm. Rin sat down on a pile of old crates, rubbing her hands together. "How long have you been living here?" she asked. "Not long," Thomas said. "I use this place when I need to work or hide from patrols. It's not much, but it's safe." Rin looked around. The freighter was filled with spare parts, tools, and old supplies. It was clear Thomas had spent time making it livable, even in this frozen junkyard. "You've made a good place," Rin said softly. "Better than I expected." Thomas smiled a little. "It's a start." For a moment they sat quietly, listening to the soft hum of the heating unit. Outside, the frozen junkyard stretched endlessly. But inside the freighter, there was a small bubble of safety. Rin pulled the blanket tighter and looked at Thomas. "What will we do now?" Thomas thought for a moment. "First we rest. Then we find a way off this junkyard. There are trading routes nearby. If we can get to them, we might find a ship willing to take us." Rin nodded slowly. The idea of leaving, this place sounded like a dream. But with Thomas here, the dream felt possible. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not leaving me behind." Thomas looked surprised for a moment, then nodded. Nobody should be left behind. The day passed slowly. Thomas checked the freighters, systems, and prepared a simple meal. Rin ate carefully, her hunger growing stronger with each bite. They talked quietly about their plans, sharing hopes for the future. As the sun set again, the stars appeared above the junkyard. Rin wrapped herself in the blanket once more. Thomas joined her by the small window, both of them watching the cold, distant lights. For the first time in a long while, Rin felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. It was fragile, but it was there. And with Thomas beside her, she believed they could face whatever came next. The cold night was deep and still when Rin and Thomas prepared to leave the freighter. The blanket wrapped tightly around Rin's shoulders was the only warmth she carried from the frozen junkyard. Thomas checked the small pack on his back one last time. Inside were the tools, a few ration bars, and the small heating lamp they had used. "Are you ready?" Thomas asked softly. Rin nodded. She felt stronger now, not just because of the food and rest, but because she was not alone. The quiet bond between them had grown into a quiet courage. They stepped out of the freighter and into the night. The stars above were clear and bright, shining like distant guides. The frozen junkyard stretched endlessly around them, a maze of broken metal and sharp shadows. Thomas led the way, moving carefully but quickly through the dark. Rin followed closely, trusting his knowledge. The patrol drones had stopped for the night. But they knew it was only a matter of time before they returned. Their goal was a small outpost beyond the junkyard's edge. Thomas said it was a place where travelers and traders met. If they could reach it, maybe they could find a ship to take them away from this frozen place. The journey was hard. The cold bit into their faces, and the ground was slippery underfoot. They climbed over twisted piles of scrap and squeezed through narrow gaps. At times, Rin's legs ached, but Thomas's steady presence kept her moving forward. As they moved deeper into the yard, the piles of junk grew taller, casting long shadows in the starlight. The silence was broken only by their footsteps and the distant calls of night birds. Suddenly, Tomas stopped. He held up a hand, signaling Rin to be still. In the distance, the faint glow of patrol drones moved slowly, their scanning lights sweeping the ground. "We need to wait," Tomas whispered. "They haven't seen us yet." Rin crouched behind a large engine block, pulling the blanket over her head. Thomas pressed close beside her, his breath visible in the cold air. The patrol lights passed slowly nearby, but the two stayed hidden and silent. When the drones moved on, Rin let out a slow breath she had been holding. "We can move now," Thomas said. They continued their journey, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. After hours of careful travel, the junkyard began to thin. The piles of scrap gave way to open ground, and faint lights appeared in the distance. "That's the outpost," Tomas said, pointing toward a cluster of small buildings and docking bays. Rin's heart lifted. They were almost free. As they approached, a group of guards stepped out. Tomas raised his hands in greeting, speaking quietly but firmly. After a tense moment, the guards nodded and allowed them inside. The outpost was warm and busy. Traders from many worlds moved through the halls, selling and buying goods. Rin felt a new kind of hope here. Thomas led her to a small room where they could rest. They sat quietly, the warmth of the building filling the space. "Now," Tomas said, "we find a way off this world." Rin smiled, feeling a strength she had never known before. The journey through the frozen junkyard had been hard, but it had taught her the power of kindness and trust. That night, under a sky full of stars, Rin and Tomas looked out from the outpost window. The stars were no longer distant and cold. They were a promise, a path to a new beginning. Together, they would travel beyond the frozen junkyard, toward whatever the stars held for them.